Okay, so we got a bit interrupted there. We got somebody doing some busking right near us. It was too noisy, so we've changed location. So we're talking about lest any root of bitterness springing up cause trouble. So bitterness will affect other people when it springs up from an attitude. Anyone who introduces the lest issue will cause problems for any congregation. So the lest issue is lest any root of bitterness springing up will cause trouble. The believer will cause trouble among God's people. And we're not talking about unbelievers, we're talking about people within the church. And by this, the word goes on to say, and by this, many become defiled. Defiled carries the idea of contamination. People in reversionism introduce an insidious or corroding dynamic to the church. Titus 1:15 says this, to the pure, all things are pure, but to those who are defiled and unbelieving, nothing is pure, but even their mind and conscience are defiled. So it will spread the poison of bitterness among Christians. Bitterness always spoils productive Christian living. What's the principle here? The failure of one can affect many. The application for us, Christians are to take into account the relationships of others with God. It is one thing to be circumspect about our behaviour, but we must care about the conduct of others as well. Others may not pursue peace and sanctification. We're all different. We're all at different stages. We all have different desires before God. Not everybody is the same, or growing or learning or progressing or submitting at the same rate. So we're all different. We need to help each other on this pathway. Christians are to give serious attention to their attitude toward people with whom they conflict. That is, people with whom they pursued peace but who rejected that offer of friendship. There is the possibility of chain reaction sinning. One sin can become the cause of another sinning. The root is, that is, in the defiled soul, can spring up and infect others. This is especially true of bitterness. The sin can ignite sin in others because it is contagious. The verse continues to give practical steps Christians ought to take in response to persecution and hardship. Earlier, the writer encouraged believers to hold fast. Hebrews 3:6 says this, but Christ, as a son over his own house, whose house we are, if we hold fast the confidence and the rejoicing of hope firm to the end. Hebrews 10:23, let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who has promised is faithful. So we are told we are to hold fast in the face of struggles. Most of the sufferings we endure as Christians is not as heavy as it could be. Think about Hebrews 12:4. You have not yet resisted to bloodshed, striving against sin. And God intends those experiences for our good, to train us into a more mature faith. Hebrews 12:11 says this, now no chastening seems to be joyful for the present, but painful. Nevertheless, afterwards it yields the peaceable fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. While we grow individually, we also need to be careful how we interact with other believers. The prior verse mentioned the need to live in peace, as well as the importance of pursuing holiness. The reference to those who fail to obtain the grace of God could mean those who are false believers. That would harmonize with the New Testament warnings about those who claim to be godly but are not. Matthew 7:15 outlines it this way, beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravenous wolves. And Jude 1:12 says this, these are spots on your love feasts, while they feast with you without fear, serving only themselves. They are clouds without water, carried about by the winds, late autumn trees without fruit, twice dead, pulled up by the roots. Upcoming verses tie into the example of Esau, who was careless toward his own birthright, also seen as a sign of one without real faith in God. While that's possible, the context seems mostly to focus on something else, a command regarding those within the church who are defiant towards God and his holiness. Prior verses mentioned the importance of holiness. Hebrews 12:14, pursue peace with all people and holiness, without which no one will see God. And other New Testament verses mention the importance of not tolerating brazen sin among those who claim the name of Christ. 1 Corinthians 5:11, but now I have written to you not to keep company with anyone named as a brother who is sexually immoral, or covetous, or an idolater, or a reveler, or a drunkard, or an extortioner, not even to eat with such a person. It seems then that the writer's point is about those who are disobedient towards God. Old Testament Hebrew causes the word bitter as a reference to poison. Here the bitter roots are said to cause trouble and defilement. Whether those persons are outright false Christians or merely rebellious believers, their influence is the same. They cause controversy and lead others to sin. Such persons cannot be allowed to remain in the body of believers. 1 Corinthians 5:13 very strongly says this, but those who are outside, God judges. Therefore, put away from yourselves the evil person. So falling short of God's grace, phrase refers to the danger of individuals failing to embrace the benefit from God's grace, potentially due to unbelief, disobedience, or lack of spiritual growth. The root of bitterness. The root of bitterness is a metaphor for unresolved anger, resentment, or unforgiveness that can take hold in a person's heart. The trouble and defilement, this is a metaphor, and it illustrates how a bitter person can cause trouble within the community with their words, their actions, their influence, and potentially leading others astray from the faith and from holiness. So the importance of community. The verse emphasizes the need for believers to watch out for one another and to address potential problems before they escalate, ensuring that the entire community can experience the fullness of God's grace. So, in summing up, Hebrews 12:15 speaks about the importance of avoiding bitterness and staying focused on God's grace. It warns against letting the root of bitterness grow, causing trouble and potential of defiling many. This verse emphasizes the need to actively pursue God's grace and to help others do the same, guarding against anything that might hinder spiritual growth. So, what is the difference between someone who is negative and someone who is bitter? A negative person sees a glass half full. A bitter person wants revenge on the person who drank the half glass. A negative person, wants person frowns, and a bitter person snarls. And bitterness is something that everyone struggles with. Hebrews 12:15 says, see to it that no one fails to obtain the grace of God, that no root of bitterness springs up and causes trouble, and through it many will become defiled. When the seed of bitterness takes root in our lives, it grows like a weed, It suffocates our ability to be kind, compassionate, patient, and loving. It dominates our thoughts. It consumes our hearts, and it spreads to others. Oftentimes, we don't even recognize the bitterness in ourselves. But there is a special weed killer for bitterness. It's called the grace of God. Grace simply means a free gift. And according to Hebrews 12 and 13, God gives us the free gift of peace and love. Peace and love kill the roots of bitterness in our lives, and it rescues us and others from being consumed by trouble. So, do you struggle with bitterness? Chances are we probably wouldn't know if we did. But the good news for you and me is this, that God gives us the grace and He rescues us from bitterness. Amen.